Exploring Britain's lost railways opens up a world of adventure.
Gotta love an old railway tunnel. Oh, this is spectacular.
As an engineer, I love the ambition and scale of the railway age.
Oh, beautiful.
And there are thousands around Britain who cherish its memory.
You missed the last train by about 85 years.
Now there are 8,000 miles of forgotten track to discover.
Wow, these are giant.
And every lost railway has its own story to tell.
That is some view there.
This time, I'm discovering the lines that unlocked the wild coast of North Devon.
Oh, that's a lovely little tunnel.
They packed out world-class beaches.
Oh, this is desperate.
They conquered Exmoor.
It's wonderful.
And laid the ground for the D-Day landings.
You would have come off under fire on the beaches of Normandy.
Here on the dramatic North Devon coast, rolling green hills give way to one of the most spectacular shorelines in Britain. But for centuries, this Atlantic coastline was barely accessible to outsiders.
Just down there is the lovely North Devon town of Ilfracombe. You know, like many spots along this stretch of the coast here, it's naturally very isolated. And 150 years ago, there certainly weren't any decent roads to get you here.
But Ilfracombe was about to join the railway age. And it would change this coastline forever.
The terrain meant that building a railway here would be a huge challenge. But that didn't stop them coming.
In 1874, an ambitious railway line opened up this rugged landscape. I'll follow its dramatic route out of Ilfracombe and around the coast to join the main line at Barnstaple. But then I'll explore a line that was even more adventurous. It fought its way across the wild terrain of Exmoor to the cliff-top town of Lynton. But this story begins in Ilfracombe, which until the mid-19th century was a small fishing town built around a natural harbour. It was famous for the quality of its herring and shellfish. Even then, Victorian entrepreneurs had their eye on attracting tourists. In the 1820s, a group of early innovators hand-carved tunnels through cliffs to allow easy access to pristine sheltered beaches. The thing they wanted more than anything, though, was a railway.
It was 4 p.m. on the 24th of March, 1870, when a telegram reached Ilfracombe with news that would change the fortunes of this town in an instant.
A bill had been passed through Parliament granting permission for a new line to be built by the Barnstaple and Ilfracombe Railway Company. And what a dramatic railway it turned out to be. As it left Ilfracombe, the line had to work its way along the steep valley below one of the highest spots in town, known as the Cairn. It's where I'm meeting a man whose family lived and breathed this railway, Kevin Cook.
There can't be many better views of Ilfracombe than this, Kevin. This is spot on.
You've got the Bristol Channel, you've got Wales in the distance.
That is Wales just over there, isn't it?
It certainly
that's
is.
The whole South Wales coast, almost.
Yeah.
Amazing.
The Gower over there, famous for its surfing. Ilfracombe, famous for its spa. And then over on the left-hand side, you've got the Torres Walk with the famous hills.
And these are the 7 hills, is that right?
That's right, yeah. It used to be one of the big advertising things about coming to Ilfracombe to improve your health, have a good time, and this was one of the famous tourist walks, the 7 Hills of Ilfracombe, like 7 Hills of Rome.
Like the 7 Hills of Rome. Would they advertise it as such? Like
Absolutely, yes.
Where was the railway station, Kevin?
If you look just down below yourself, you'll see what looks like a factory, because it is a factory.
This white big roof down here?
Yeah, and the building beyond it. And that is the area where the old station used to be.
OK.
Yeah, so down there you had the platforms, you had the station building, the goods yard, the engine shed, signal box, and a very unique feature down the bottom called a turntable.
You know that area quite well, do you?
Yes, yeah. Well, my family's been connected with the railway here from the year dot, really. My great-grandfather, Joseph Hatchley, he was the signalman. Then my grandfather became the signalman here. And then I had my first summer job there. I was selling ice creams on the platform.
Kevin's family were here during the most glamorous era of Ilfracombe's rail history, the days of the Atlantic Coast Express. This was a special direct service from London Waterloo that took just 5¼ hours.
You've got to remember that Ilfracombe was hugely popular. We had thousands of people coming down to Ilfracombe by train. This is in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
It was the main source of mass transport. And the trains had, you know, wonderful names. It was like the Devon Bell. I just got such a clear recollection of them flooding off the trains. The taxis would be lined up outside the station and they would whisk them down to the B&Bs and hotels in Ilfracombe.
To come out and suddenly be confronted with this as the drama of the hills as you're approaching the coast, and then suddenly be confronted with this, maybe for the first time in your life.
Well, I hope that when you follow the line, you'll appreciate there's a big curve that goes up around the valley there. And when they came down to us, they'd come out of a railway tunnel and they'd enter the start of this valley, and you could see right down all the way to the coast. So you could see the sea in the distance, the hills. Spectacular. It was absolutely spectacular.
This railway provided magical experiences for generations. But I want to turn the clock back to the very beginning, the days when this line was being built. It's clear from the landscape around me, it was going to be far from easy. I'm following the cycle path that now runs along the first 3½ miles of the old railway. A line that had £174,000 allocated for its construction. The engineers were going to need every penny.
I'm only ½ mile or so along from Ilfracombe station back there, and I'm already climbed about 100 feet. That is some slope behind me, and it only continues up ahead as well. And this is a bit of a hint, really, as to how much work the engineers had cut out for them. 30 bridges, 28 cuttings, dozens of embankments. That is a staggering amount of infrastructure and earthworks that needed to be completed for a line that's only just over 14 miles long. But without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest engineering challenge of the whole line was a long, deep cutting just north of Morthoe station here. It was the first part of the line to be started and the last to be finished.
The engineers discovered that the local rock was tough, tougher than they'd anticipated. So after a full 2 years of building work, they were forced into an unlikely change of plan. The cutting became a tunnel.
Now, you might think that building a tunnel that's only 69 yards long is incredibly expensive and labour-intensive for what you get out of it. But this tunnel actually helped save costs on this line. It turned out it was cheaper to bore a tunnel through the rock than all the back-breaking work necessary to dig out all this obstinate rock above me to open up a cutting. Gotta love an old railway tunnel.
Woo! And Slade Tunnel, as it's called, has a surprise in store. One that hints at the spectacular early success of the railway line.
Oh, that's a lovely little tunnel. In fact, There's lovely 2 little tunnels. From the moment this line opened, it was an instant hit. In fact, within the first few years, they almost doubled the amount of trains that were running on it every single day. And within just 15 years, they built a second track to accommodate all those trains, and hence you've got the 2 tunnels through here. So now, trains could run freely in both directions.
This early Victorian success paved the way for decades of prosperity. If it hadn't been for the second line, there's no way the big locomotives of the Atlantic Coast Express could have steamed up and down here a few decades later. For centuries, the North Devon coastline was wild, dramatic, and largely inaccessible. But I'm walking a lost railway line that changed that forever. The Barnstaple and Ilfracombe Railway was opened in 1874. It linked this coastline to a rail network that stretched all the way to London's Waterloo. At its height in the late 1930s, 24 passenger trains a day travelled in both directions on their way to the seaside resort of Ilfracombe. But the following decade would change everything. Thousands of visitors gave way to thousands of troops as the Second World War came to North Devon.
In 1943, the small countryside station at Morthoe, which was a little further along the line from me here, became the unlikely hub for a full-scale military operation. Millions of tons of hardware arrived on trains brought in along this line. And the station itself became surrounded by makeshift warehouses to store all the weaponry, the vehicles and the military equipment. It was all part of the huge preparations for D-Day.
The beaches of North Devon turned out to be the perfect training for the planned invasion of Europe. Their long sweeps of sand resembled Normandy, the Allies' target for the D-Day landings.
If you think very hard, you can kind of picture the scene. And it's certainly a contrast to all these holidaymakers enjoying the beach. Instead, it was soldiers storming ashore, surrounded by smoke and gunfire and explosions, trying to simulate the kinds of sounds and smells and the general terror they'd be likely to face on the beaches of Normandy.
But there's a twist in this story. Whilst the British Army had been training in Woolacombe, in the build-up to D-Day, a foreign presence arrived that would have a huge impact, not just on the war, but on this whole area. Americans. Lots of them. From the fine beaches of Woolacombe to the grassy sand dunes of Braunton Burrows. By 1943, North Devon was awash with GIs. Today, Braunton Burrows is a barren, isolated place. It's where I've come to meet Richard Bass, a local military historian, to find out how North Devon coped with our key wartime ally.
Over 14,000 came through here in a 6-month period. Because they were billeted in the southwest peninsula, the most of them did arrive by train. They would come into Braunton, which had problems of its own because it was a little country station with a little short platform. And the troop trains, of course, were so long that they would have to pull up 2 or 3 times to allow the GIs to step out onto the platform.
But it wasn't just the soldiers, it was all of their equipment, I imagine, as well, that was being brought in on the trains.
Everything, you know, from socks, boots, ammunition, explosives, food, everything came by train up to Morthoe.
Goodness me. But then when the soldiers weren't training out here and on a day off perhaps, did they make use of the railway line then?
Yes, very often the American GIs went into the town of Barnstaple. The train service then, of course, was quite infrequent. So when the last train had gone, to get them back to barracks, of course, they used to steal bicycles from the town of Barnstaple. and cycle home, and then bury the bicycles here on the sand dunes.
Hiding the evidence, never
Yes.
to be found again.
No.
Coming up here then, it would have been a very different sight. You would have been looking out across these sand dunes that would have been covered with GIs and their equipment, and it would have been noisy, I guess, with guns firing and smoke billowing and whatever else.
They were really put through the mill for 3 weeks. They had a really, really hard time.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, the commandant, Paul Thompson, said if it hadn't been for the beaches of North Devon, Omaha wouldn't have been the success it was.
Really?
Yeah.
The evidence of the training activity here is still part of this landscape. Hidden among the dunes are 6 replica concrete landing craft.
Is this what we're talking about here?
Yes.
The real vessels could carry 135 tons of cargo. That's 5 tanks, 9 trucks, or hundreds of men. And the process of unloading them was rehearsed over and over again.
Whilst they were actually approaching the shore itself, they would be under fire from artillery, from mortars, machine guns, from all sorts of weapons.
Yeah.
So they were taking fire, anything from half a mile out. And of course, once they actually hit the beach, the ramp would drop, which would open up the jaws there, and fire would simply come in. And the vehicles and the men in here would actually have to storm through that narrow little gap that was already being fired at by the enemy.
Goodness me, yeah, wow. Actually, it's quite powerful walking through here, because you're imagining what it would have been like now stepping out onto those beaches of Normandy.
Yes, that's right.
And then, well, goodness knows what was awaiting you on this side here.
That's it. Once the ramp dropped, of course, your job was to get off as quick as you can, and you would have come off under fire on the beaches of Normandy.
So these are real monuments then to those efforts and those sacrifices that were made.
Yes, they are. They're very important. They're quite unique. There are none other anywhere in the whole of Europe.
And here they are, hidden away.
Yes.
Quite striking, Richard. Despite the huge losses suffered, ultimately D-Day was a success. And a huge part of that is thanks to those thousands of American soldiers who arrived here on the train to prepare for war amongst this unique landscape of North Devon. And for me, I can never possibly come close to imagining what that was like for them in reality. But being here and seeing all of this, hearing the stories about what went on and standing on the concrete where those soldiers were preparing for war, I think does bring me a little closer to that reality. Maybe a slightly deeper appreciation for that sacrifice.
Despite the very serious reasons for them being here, there's no doubt the Americans made the most of their downtime, leaving an unlikely wartime legacy. This brilliant coastline is now famous across the world for surfing.
Now, it's been a good few years since I've been out on the waves. Sure it'll be fine. Come on, let's go have fun.
The beaches along this stretch of my railway boast one all-important feature. They face west, towards the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, this is desperate.
The powerful swell makes North Devon a highly desirable surfing location.
That's a nightmare.
In the 1930s, some early rail travellers did come here to bellyboard.
Just waiting for the right wave out here. It's quite hard work paddling out.
But it was the Americans who popularised real surfing here. After the Second World War, standing up on a surfboard became the only way to do it.
Fantastic out there. These are perfect conditions for me. Not too big, not too small, somewhere in the middle. And this board is a joy to ride.
Break over, though. It's time I caught up with my lost line. I'm picking it up as it swings to the east. And as it heads to its destination in Barnstaple, it follows the rather lovely River Tor. Today, this bit of line gets used by the South West Coast Path, one of the most popular walkways in the country.
So there's Ilfracombe, an inaccessible fishing port that became a popular seaside resort. There are the beaches where the American troops prepared for D-Day, and for me at least, what's become one of the best surfing spots in Britain. This railway line completely transformed North Devon. And yet, if you go back a few years before the railway arrived, it's surprising to discover that it almost didn't get built at all.
As plans were being put forward, there was an objector, one of the richest landowners in Great Britain. Sir William Williams lived here at Heington Court. In 1863, he managed to get the railway bill thrown out of Parliament. His big issue was that the planned railway was set to pass through his view of the beautiful River Tor. But the locals were determined to get their line. I'm meeting Stephen Palmer from the Ilfracombe Museum to find out how they fought back, quite literally.
About 200 people went off to their houses. Sticks and stones were thrown, windows were broken. Somebody tried to beat down one of the doors, apparently.
Oh, goodness me, this is
fortunately
nasty.
Didn't happen. The Ilfracombe policeman turned up, but there was very little he could do. He eventually fetched Mr. Nathaniel Vye, the magistrate, who actually and literally read the Riot Act.
Wow.
If you don't disperse, this will become a capital offence, which means you could hang.
Right. That says so much about just how angry those people of Ilfracombe were. That,
Yes, indeed.
that this bill had not been passed.
Yeah.
They weren't going to get their railway.
No, they needed the railway to bring them people, bring them tourists.
But the railway did get built.
Oh, yes.
And, well, this now cycle path is evidence to that.
Yeah. Eventually, in 1870, another bill got to the House of Lords.
So sometime later.
Oh, yeah. So the townspeople had been waiting for years and years for their railway.
They were desperate to have it.
They were desperate.
And this time, the bill was passed. From that point, it took just 4 years for the railway to be completed.
There were huge floral triumphal arches erected about the town.
Amazing. And I bet the pubs were full again, weren't they?
I should think they probably were, yes. And of course, then along comes the Atlantic Coast Express.
So it brought the benefits that they thought it would.
Benefits to everybody.
And for very nearly a century, the railway made a big impact here. But as with so many rural railways, the line fell victim to the government cuts of the 1960s. The final train eventually ran here in October 1970.
I wonder how many people who travel here today by road know about the debt that this whole area owes to this lost line. Luckily for me, though, as I approach the end of it, in Barnstaple, this isn't the only lost railway in town.
I'm exploring the lost railways that once opened the way to the North Devon coast. But right now, I've reached the railway hub of this area.
Very quaint little station building.
My first railway arrived from Ilfracombe in 1874. And by the late 1800s, Barnstaple had 3 stations: Barnstaple Junction, Barnstaple Town, and Victoria Road.
So if you wanted to build a railway across North Devon, Barnstaple was the logical place to start.
And in 1894, that's what happened. Building work began on a line that would stretch 19 miles, connecting Barnstaple with a new coastal destination, the isolated clifftop village of Lynton. The new railway's challenge was to tackle Exmoor, a land of wooded valleys, waterfalls and deep ravines. In short, a headache for railway engineers.
Before this line opened, the only way to cross the wilds of Exmoor was along a slow, unforgiving road, either on foot, on horseback, or by horse-drawn coach. And even then, you were looking at a miserable, bumpy 3-hour journey. And Lynton, at the far end of this line, was one of the furthest towns from a railway in Britain.
But one early, intrepid visitor to Lynton would change the fortunes of the town forever. Sir George Newnes was a founding father of popular journalism and a successful publisher. One of his writers was Sherlock Holmes author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Newnes believed spending £43,000 on a new railway would make Lynton as popular as his books and magazines. Today, most of the line has reverted to private land, but dotted along the route, there are little spots where the evidence of what he built remains. At Snapper Holt, some track has even been relayed along the old platform. It's where I'm meeting Peter Miles of the Lynton and Barnstaple Railway Trust.
What I notice about this, though, this is narrow gauge, isn't it, as opposed to standard, the wider gauge?
Yep. To get a standard gauge railway over Exmoor would be very difficult, very expensive, and very challenging.
Because of the terrain, right?
Exactly,
I mean,
yeah.
Does narrow gauge help with building a railway in that kind of challenging environment, then?
Tremendously. It'll take tighter curves, it can cling to the hillsides. If you're going to go through a cutting, it hasn't got to be so big.
Okay, yeah.
The bridges don't have to be so heavy.
I mean, how much infrastructure and earthworks needed to happen to build this between Barnstaple and Lynton?
There's almost nowhere that's not on an embankment or in a cutting. There's something like about 85 bridges.
Whoa! And there's all of that civil engineering within
Yes.
that short distance?
Yes, indeed.
Well, can you tell me about this character, George Newnes, who's quite a big personality behind this railway being built?
Well, yes, he was. George Newnes was a wealthy chap in his own right. He was a publisher.
What was his relationship with this part of the country?
He visited Lynton, fell in love with the place, built a house there, a great big house on top of Holiday Hill, and he was a benefactor to the town. He paid for a church, a town hall, and they wanted a railway connection, because in the 19th century you were nowhere if you didn't have a railway.
So this wasn't just about bringing people to Lynton, this isolated town that had been pretty cut off from the rest of Britain before the railway came. It was also about benefiting those communities all the way along the line.
Yes, it was a proper social benefit railway. It did have a great impact.
Good old George Newnes.
Yep.
Well, it is stunning landscape through here. I mean, I'm quite keen to continue my journey and take in the wilds of Exmoor. And I'm just imagining what it would have been like for people on the trains as they're going through. I mean, must have just been wide eyes and amazement.
The way the railway twists and turns, with different views from left or right side, is fantastic. And frankly, unique in England. There isn't another railway line like this in England. We're looking forward to getting the whole thing opened again one day so people can experience that once more.
Quite right, quite right.
In its time, this railway put Exmoor on the map for tourists. And it was much loved too, because travelling along this line was an experience in itself. Nowhere more so than from its standout piece of engineering. Chelfham Viaduct stands as tall as 5 double-decker buses, bridging a river and 2 streams. Today, I've been granted very rare permission to walk across it.
Well, this is a rather massive privilege, and I'm grinning like a Cheshire cat because I know I'm one of the very first people to be walking across this viaduct in the last 20 years. It's quite a special part of this line. Oh, yeah. And it's a good way down. I mean, I'm right above the stream here, so I'm pretty much at the highest point. That's 70 feet down there. And it looks every single one of them. Oh, this is just fantastic. I tell you what, it's a bit odd though. I don't think I've ever been on a narrow gauge viaduct before, and it does feel quite hemmed in as I'm up here in the middle of the valley. It's an odd sensation. And you can see what it's made up of. It's 8 identically shaped circular arches along its length. It's entirely made of brick. 250,000 of them, to be precise. This is Britain's largest narrow gauge structure. It's wonderful.
What's particularly brilliant is that this viaduct has been extensively restored, but not for the benefit of walkers, I should add. A group of volunteers have plans to relay track and run trains over the viaduct in the near future. And a few miles east, there's a very short stretch of the old line that they've already opened. Killington Lane Station is the place to come to get a genuine taste of Sir George Newnes' line. Since 2004, a 1-mile section has been back up and running. And the attention to detail is extraordinary.
Here we go then. Bit of a treat for me today. Yes, please. This is very nice. Get used to this.
Way back in 1920, this line was described as a toy train with a blustering little engine. But there was no lack of comfort, in first class at least.
Oh, well, this is very nice. Very comfortable. It feels very plush in here. Oh, hello.
Good afternoon. Is everything all right with you?
I think so. How's everything looking on the train? All right, we all set?
We're all set, I think, yes. We've done 8 trains today, so we've been nicely busy.
Good, good.
So we're very glad you could come and see us.
Well, she's all warmed up then, ready to go.
Oh, definitely all warmed up, yeah.
I'm looking forward to the ride.
Thank you very much indeed.
Cheerio.
George Newnes always believed that people would use his railway because it was a joy to ride.
Take the strain.
And 122 years later, I'm joining the happy list of passengers.
Fantastic. Just look at the upholstery in here, all these details around. These brass fittings around me here. Let's open up this window here. Oh, look at this detail, leather strap on there as well. Let's get that. Get the countryside. Oh, beautiful. Oh, you can smell the engine as well there. The coal and the smoke.
Riding this unique railway gives you the chance to appreciate a small slice of Exmoor. But the plan now is to restore the entire 19 miles of George Newnes' legendary line, piece by piece.
That might be a slow and steady progress along this line, but there are some steep inclines to deal with. And I'm not complaining. Can't rush this.
For now, my journey ends 3 miles short of Lynton at Woody Bay. But this feels like one lost line I might need to revisit, because in the coming years, more of Exmoor's lost railway might make a return. I'm walking the lost railway lines that once opened up the Atlantic coastline of North Devon. I've seen how Ilfracombe joined the railway age by connecting with the rail network at Barnstaple. But now I'm following the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle, a remarkable railway built by publishing magnate George Newnes. The Lynton and Barnstaple Railway wasn't big, and it certainly wasn't fast. But it conquered the wilds of Exmoor and created another line to the North Devon coast.
On the 11th of May 1898, the very first train service travelled along this line. And nearly 2 hours after leaving Barnstaple, it approached the terminus at Lynton station. And the train stopped here to allow George Newnes' wife to disembark and cut the inaugural ribbons that stretched across the track. One of the most adventurous lines in railway history had just been declared open.
But as passengers reached the end of their journey, they arrived on the coastline a full 700 feet above sea level. Lynton Station was built just outside the town to avoid the railway spoiling the coastal views. But today, the station itself has great appeal. For over 4 decades, it's been the much-loved home of Bill Pryor.
So you missed the last train by about 85 years, but...
Rats. So this is the old platform here.
This was the old platform.
You've got the old loco here. This is where the trains are coming in. This is the platform edge, is it here?
Well, being narrow gauge, of course, it was a very low platform.
You can tell this is an old railway station. It's got that kind of architecture, the stonework.
These days, though, a few things have had to change. The old ticket office has become Bill's bathroom, and the station buffet has become the kitchen.
Back in those days, because there was a full-blown newsagents up here and a licensed bar that was open all day. You've got to remember, back in those days, the place would be absolutely heaving with holiday makers.
Right.
They had horse-drawn carriages picking people up in the early days to take them back down to Lynmouth. And people would be up here, so obviously a licensed bar, very handy. Plus, of course, the locals, as there were no licensing laws on station buffets, the locals would spend half the day up here.
Who had no intention of getting on the trains to go anywhere. They're just quite happy
Just
to
come up
and get a refreshment.
Have a drink.
Why not? And just watch the world go by. People coming in and the trains going out.
At its height, Lynton Station brought in up to 100,000 people each year. But the sad truth is, the railway very rarely made any money. Plenty of people travelled in the summer, precious few in the winter. This tiny railway only ran for 37 years. Less time, in fact, than Bill's been living here.
My brother lent me the railway magazine with the advert, a golden opportunity to buy Lynton Lynmouth Railway Station.
Oh, I bet your eyes lit up, didn't they?
Absolutely. And
the rest is history, as
the
they
rest
say.
is history. I love it, absolutely love it.
If you look closely, Bill's home has a passing resemblance to an alpine chalet. And that's no accident. Clifftop Lynton and its sea-level neighbour Lynmouth came to be known as the English Switzerland. A pair of communities separated by dramatic wooded cliffs and rushing water. Despite the amazing view, there was a problem. How would all these visitors arriving into the railway station make their way down to the shoreline? George Newnes had the answer: another railway. The Lynton and Lynmouth Cliff Railway.
That's 500 feet below me there. Look at the views across North Devon.
This very special railway is known as a funicular. And when it opened in 1890, this one was the highest and steepest in the world.
How are we doing?
Good.
Now, this railway runs on water effectively, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So the principle is, it's all about a weight balancing principle, and it's very, very simple. It's like scales, really. Whatever's heavier is going to go down. So both carriages are filled with water. They've got massive 700-gallon tanks underneath. And am I right in thinking you fill it here?
If you pull that lever up, Rob, that will fill it up.
I can fill that up now?
Yeah.
This lever here?
That's right.
Let's give it a go.
The water used to power the line is extracted from the West Lynn River, more than a mile away.
All right, well, that's filling up. I'm going to go make myself a comfy on board, if that's all right, Ashley. Very nice. Oh, that's a view.
Certainly is.
Goodness me. Fantastic. How are we looking? We're almost full in that tank.
Yeah, we're full up now and ready to go.
So now both carriages, the one at the bottom and the one up here, the water tanks are full, and this is where the balancing principle comes into play. So depending on how many passengers would be in that carriage and how many passengers in this carriage, water is then slowly let out from the tank at the carriage at the bottom until it becomes that much lighter than this one up here. And then it's like weighing scales. Whatever's heavier is going to go down because of gravity. So we'll let that happen, and eventually we'll start moving down. And away we go down the hill.
The hauling cables run around a huge 5'6" pulley wheel at the top and bottom of the tracks.
Oh, now we're off.
During construction, thousands of tons of rock needed to be removed to create a route up and down the cliff.
And it's just wonderfully simple mechanics, which puts a big old smile on my face. This is fantastic. Oh. Safe to say, this is one of my favourite railway journeys of all time. Perfection. Cheers, Ashley. Thank you very much.
It's more than 5 decades since anyone actually reached Lynton or Ilfracombe by train. So 130 years after it opened, it's lovely to find the tiny cliff railway is still here, doing exactly what was intended, bringing people to this much-loved coastline.
North Devon's landscape has defined its relationship with railways. The lines I've explored were far from the first in Britain, and with these extremes of terrain they had to cross, they certainly weren't the easiest to be built, but they were worth the wait. They may have gone now, but what I've discovered is that it's thanks to the unique role they played that this coastline now boasts some of the most attractive and desirable seaside destinations this country has to offer.